My name is Mzwanele Jwanti, and I'm a research fellow at the School of Economics here at Wits. And I mean, I was once a student leader on campus, and I'm now I'm now a research fellow in the school. So basically, what Kenneth and I were working on is basically looking at core and some of the case studies that can be adapted into core, looking into South Africa as well as in Africa in general. So my introduction to economics was basically when I was first year in the university in 2013, and I had come to the university so that I could study to become an actuary one day. That did not work out. But basically, economics was actually a stressful course for me, not because it was mathematically difficult, but the way in which it was taught. So it looked like there was the economics, and then there was the maths, and it seemed like people struggled to then put us inside this whole situation. And I remember that some of the jokes that we used to make with our classmates was the ceteris paribus, so keep things constant, and the assumptions that used to be made, some used to be theoretical and some used to come out of the tables, everyone just struggled to figure these MCQs out and answer because there's just so many assumptions that get made about these questions, and no one really tells you where to get these assumptions, but they're here and you are expected to know them, and they lectured. And I became involved in student politics, and what came out clear at the time that we had about a list of demands that we had, and one of the demands that we had was, of course, free education, which was a generational mission of students in South Africa. The second one was curriculum reform and institutional changes, and a list goes on. We had about 6, I think, of them. And in 2015, this became a serious conversation that was once undertaken in the country at large. The issue of funding as well as the issue of curriculum reform. I think many universities established transformation committees that looked into the issue of curriculum reform as well as academic transformation, etc. in the universities. And therefore, looking at the core, or when we had Wendy and Sam coming last year, it was one step into that direction where we're responding to the issue of curriculum reform. The problems with the curriculum that we had as students at the time was that the curriculum was very Western. So it spoke nothing to the regular South African person, and some of the issues we could not even deal with them. And I mean, by the time I got to honors, I doubt I would have been able to do any work unless I had 6 months training as an intern. But I had gone through university curriculum, and therefore that speaks to the second point of employability, to then say that the graduates that seemed to have gone through this curriculum were not employable, and they would not be able to take the issues that they had at hand. So then there was a big discussion about transformation, decolonization, reform, etc. And when I was speaking with my comrades in the preparing for this conversation, and they still said that there was still no consensus of whether we should decolonize, we should transform, or we should reform. But the words are somewhere there. And now, and that's basically where we are. So broadly, that's what we've spoken. But fortunately, in the School of Economics, we've been able to begin the journey of getting to something that will look like what we know, which is basically transforming this curriculum. And I think many speakers that spoke yesterday made the point that it was just not a simple thing to do, but we should eventually get there. And so looking at the core, what I've just basically done is to come up with some examples that when you read the core, you can say that, okay, this is the case study that could fit in South Africa in terms of what is being discussed in the unit. So I'll just go through the units themselves. I think another point I wanted to make was that while we needed a curriculum that was locally responsive, we understood that the students needed to be globally competent. So there is an urgent need that while South Africans will be able to respond to African problems, they need to be able to respond to global problems as well. So it's sort of that you've got to balance that. But students seem to just want to read about the South African economists, what they've done, etc., etc. But what really you need as well is being able to compete in the global economy. And if you look at the core, which is basically looking at the capitalist revolution, Unit 1, and I think in South Africa, what you basically think about the whole industrial revolution after the world wars and in the first one, etc., etc. What you basically have in South Africa is the issue of colonialism. So what you basically then would have is that you have this wave of industrial revolution where we could look at when the first machine came to South Africa, etc., etc. But what you basically had to deal with is what Terry Blanche calls the four political economy systems in his book, Lost in Transformation in South Africa. I think he published it in 2008. He's a professor in Stellenbosch. And what he basically calls it is that he begins in 1964 and he looks at the vogue that he speaks about. And what he basically speaks about is the English that established themselves in South Africa but continued to benefit from some colonialism from India. And what you then had was the 1795 to about 1948, where you had the British colonialism, and that's when the energy mineral complex began to be a big thing in South Africa. And this is what I also mentioned to have been a situation where you then had a lot of family structure being disrupted, because you had a lot of men that were living homes to be established in those areas that had identified gold, platinum, as well as diamonds, etc. So you go up to 1994, where then after the British colonialism, we had apartheid that began 1948 up until 1994, and you basically had this social, this political, economic times in South Africa that can be easily traced and established. So that industrial revolution in South Africa had a lot to do with the establishment of colonialism and British, and mainly what he emphasizes is the energy complex, which drove the South African economy up until 1994. And of course, in South Africa, then you have a serious problem which pops up in a lot of these units of the core, which is the issue of inequality, and it's racial and it's sexist as well in South Africa. So you've got men, well, you typically have white men on top of the ladder, and then you have black females at the bottom of the pay scales. So it's racial as well as sexist. Normally in other countries, you'd find it to be sexist, but in South Africa it's twice the struggle. And you have then the emergence of the fourth industrial revolution. I think that's the fourth one that we speak about now. That's the inequalities, and let me just go to the unit 2, which then speaks about technological progress. So I thought the part of the fourth industrial revolution links well with technological progress, which Unit 2 speaks about. So all these capitalist revolutions that have taken place over the history of human existence, you then have this situation where now people are speaking about the fourth industrial revolution, and you're basically looking at population as well as economic growth. So normally when you have got these revolutions, people get anxious about what is going to happen to growth, the economic growth, as well as employability. So what we looked at firstly, before I get to this fourth industrial revolution story, is that we looked at the impact that HIV and AIDS had in the South African population. So you would know that we had a big problem in the late 90s, early 2000s, where a lot of people were dying because of HIV and our struggle to secure cheap AR fields. I think Unit 2 also speaks about building models. How do you teach students to build models? And there's a lot of those things, and I was discussing with Kenneth as well to say, there's a lot of things we can teach students to use from science, from sociology, and other fields to say to them, this is how, in fact, you can better understand this model. So take a model from physics or a model from chemistry and say, okay, you can understand interest rates just like you can understand the combination of these chemicals, you know? And those are the things that we can speak about. So now you then go to this population growth that I was referring to and the deaths that took place at the time. So you then look at what really causes population growth. For instance, Malthus would then argue that if you have got growth in output, you should have growth in the population as well. And then some people then would say that in South Africa, what you've been seeing, child pregnancy, immorality, etc., is that the population is growing, but the funny thing is that the economy is not necessarily growing. So what you want to see is whether Malthus's hypothesis that in the midst of population of output growth, when the economy is booming, you are likely to have people also expansion in the population, etc. Whether that population, of course, becomes part of the labor force is another thing that you could look at. But then what you also then look at is technology truly destructive, which is basically now the whole conversation about the fourth industrial revolution. And I just have this video here of the Nedbank. I think at the beginning of this year, there was the Pick and Pay wanted to do away with tellers and have got a self-service system where people can just come, buy, pay their things and go. Nedbank also wanted to retrench some people and have this thing done by robots. I said to my friend that, you know, when God created man, he actually didn't want men to work. And we've spent the whole time since we ate that fruit trying to figure out whether we should continue to save our lives, but maybe the search is finally found that we don't need to work. We can enjoy the fruits and the world that God created us, and we can allow the robots to do the work. I don't think Dr. Alto agrees with me, but this is what is happening. When these things happen, you then have got a lot of anxiety and fear from people that they will be replaced by robots. And economists need to be able to answer to the general people as to how this is not destructive to their employment as well as their livelihood. And the Unit 3 that we basically have on the core is basically looking at scarcity, work, and choice. And I think this is the first sentence we teach students when they come to Economics 1. We say that economics is the study under scarcity. So that's what we basically teach them. That so all the whole thing that you do here is basically we're trying to tell you, that we are trying to allocate resources and that are scarce, and how do we basically efficiently allocate those resources. And what basically comes out is that we will obviously often have a situation of misallocation of the resources and such as things like underemployment and idle resources, etc., etc. So we're not normally efficient, and I think the core speaks a lot throughout these chapters about Pareto efficiency. Is this allocation Pareto efficient, or is this exercise that we're engaged in Pareto efficient, etc.? And I normally tell students that if you want to understand utility, you must go to Burger King. If you don't go to Burger King, you are unlikely to pass the section on utility. And they normally go because they want to pass, and they tell me how bottomless cold drink is like. But there's no better example than to send them to Burger King to understand their preferences, whether they want to move to higher indifference curves or not, or they would rather remain on the same indifference curve given the budget constraints that they have. And normally they don't have a lot of money, so they understand the concept, but that they can't continue consuming. And another thing that we can understand is the cross-country and across-sector average working hours, free time, and consumption. And I think this is around the looking at the what you call this the living standards in the economy. And I think also core fails to capture the fact that this living standard is not only about the income. Sometimes people want leisure, and sometimes consumption, and sometimes just general happiness if there's no pollution, etc. And these are the things that we need to really talk about, that it's not about the money. So, but throughout, even core makes the emphasis about the GDP per person, GDP per person, GDP per person. Sometimes we need to look at consumption per person, and sometimes we just look at general levels of happiness that people have, and normally that comes from leisure, which of course if they allow robots to work, they will be able to enjoy that. And what you then have is Unit 4, which is basically social interactions. And social interactions can best be explained by game theory. And a lot of people that do public economics would look at these theories and the provision of public goods, and I think it's a very serious matter. But normally you find, more especially in developing economies, where this provision of public goods is not is a difficult thing to balance, and whether people that vote actually get the water and the electricity and what the politicians promise them. So you find yourself in a game theory where you've got two players, the government and the people, and you are told that the outcome will be water, or if you do that, etc. So you've got some implicit game that is being played, but people are not quite sure what the outcomes will be. Of course, game theory, I don't know if they mentioned that, we make the assumption that you're playing it with complete information, but often markets are dealt with incomplete information, and this is what you normally find as well as in this relationship between government and the people, or power and the people. And some of the examples that you can nicely tell a person who's coming from the rural areas of Eastern Cape is that if you're speaking about the problem of the commons, you just, because normally when they come to university, they would have been looking after sheep and cows. Well, I was. When I came to vets, it's only when I stopped looking after cows. So when I go home on holidays, I still go look after cows. But now it's oh, this is nice. Right, but it only made sense to me that when they were grazing, it was in fact dealing with the tragedy of the commons. And what I also thought is a very topical thing currently in South Africa is data. Data is quite expensive. People want to be on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, but they can't because of data. So you then have a situation with the social or telecommunication networks, MTN, Cell C, and Vodacom, where you find that Cell C would say you've got free Facebook, and you find MTN say that you've got free Twitter, and then you find Vodacom there you've got free calls at night, etc. So this continues. For instance, recently MTN stopped with the free Twitter, and now Vodacom does their own things where they campaigning with Next Level. So we've got this repeated, what we would call in South Africa, shift in the market share in terms of the telecommunications. Because I remember when Cell C offered free Mixit, I was on Cell C. Yeah. But when Vodacom offered, so you then have this repeated games between the telecommunications and the market share, basically people moving from in between these social media networks because of the offers that they give to people at different times. And Unit 5, which looks at property and power. And I've always said that if we understood the land question in South Africa as a property rights question, we could obviously deal with it maybe in a more comprehensive way. But it's not been really understood like that. But I think also the question that is given, the exercise that is given on core about Bruno and the person who came to take the land, it's somehow, like I say, I don't know how they eventually became the owner of the land, but then they were owner of the land which Bruno was working initially. And you basically can use such examples to answer the question that you're basically dealing with, and then you ask the students whether or not the land question is indeed Pareto efficient, and in a sense of how can we deal with the land question in a more Pareto efficient way, because you have a situation where the market you've got market failure and you have got a property rights problem, and then you need to be able to solve it in a more Pareto efficient manner. And then you have got Unit 6, which basically looks at firms, owners, managers, and employees. And what you basically have currently in South Africa is, it's broadly a problem of the way they currently structured. You've got a vertical approach into employment, and you have got a situation where there isn't a good relationship between managers as well as the employees. So you basically have a big situation of a principal agent problem, but you have a lot of examples on how you can deal with the principal agent problem. So I thought we can, as the focus groups that Kenneth spoke about, talk about how a continued vertical approach is not necessarily an efficient one, and how we can deal better with the principal agent problem between firms and employees. And you then have firms and employees, and then you have firm and its customers. And I then thought that we could look at our own state enterprises and how they are failing. And you have a situation where ESCOM has got diseconomies of scale, whereas they should be having economies of scale. And how do you deal with this market? The more I realize that it's just a matter of corruption, etc., then how do you get to have your first-year students explain these economic problems? And I think we can nicely, in fact, find the second part of economies of scope, just like the core uses the data from universities to see how they generate more money from research, from teaching and learning, as well as grants from corporate. And I think we can easily get that data as well for South African universities, and would be able to tell whether they are experiencing economies of scope. And I think I'm proposing that they do experience economies of scope. And we look also at the impact of syntax, tobacco and alcohol. And I normally teach this part under the efficient markets, and then the students always argue that the syntax does not discourage them from consuming the alcohol. They've got an inelastic demand for alcohol and cigarettes, etc. So it's normally difficult to teach this part, Sam, because the students in fact have got...
That's why we tax out. For exactly that reason.
But they've got inelastic demand.
That's why we tax out. Because they will continue to pay the money.
Yeah, but the supply curve that we show is not inelastic. You know, the demand curve is downward sloping and the supply curve is upward sloping, whereas the people actually have got a vertical relationship with alcohol. so yeah, it's quite okay. And I think that recently there's been recent cases where really you've got a situation where you have the Competition Commission working, fighting for customers